The Duke who lost his sight learned her face by touch and said, "Now I see you better than before." His fingers trembled against her cheekbone, tracing the architecture of a face he would never see, and Margot felt every defense she'd built crumble beneath that gentle, desperate touch. "Please," the Duke of Ravenswood whispered, his sightless eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder, his pride shattered across the floor of his study like the crystal decanter he'd knocked over in his blindness. "Please, just let me understand what you look like. Let me see you the only way I can now." She should have refused. She was his paid companion, hired to read to him and guide him, and never, ever to matter. But his hands were shaking with vulnerability, and she had spent 6 weeks watching this proud, brilliant man reduced to fumbling helplessness by the darkness that had stolen his world. So Margot took his wrists and guided his palms to her face, and felt something fundamental shift between them as his fingers began to read her like Braille, like poetry, like a language only the two of them would ever speak. Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. It had started 3 months before, on a November morning when fog pressed against London like a wet wool blanket, and Margot Sinclair stood outside an imposing townhouse in Mayfair, trying to convince herself that desperation wasn't the same as defeat. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and so far beyond the pale of respectability that even her name was spoken in whispers. The daughter of a disgraced scholar who drunk himself to death should spent the last 5 years barely surviving, as a governess until she was dismissed for teaching her charges too much mathematics, as a lady's companion until the lady's son made advances she'd firmly rejected, as a seamstress until her eyes began to fail from the close work. Now she was here, answering an advertisement for a position so unusual that no respectable woman would consider it. Companion to the Duke of Ravenswood, who'd lost his sight in a riding accident 6 months prior and had since dismissed every helper, nurse, and well-meaning relative who'd tried to assist him. The butler who answered the door looked her over with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. "Miss Sinclair, you're the 9th applicant this month. His Grace has dismissed all the others within 3 days." "What was their flaw?" Margot asked, following him into a house that smelled of beeswax and neglect. "Pity," the butler said simply. "His Grace cannot abide being pitied." The Duke of Ravenswood was waiting in his study, standing by the window with his back to the door, and Margot's first thought was that he looked like a statue of a Greek god who'd forgotten how to move. He was 33 years old, she'd learned that much from the gossip sheets, tall and built with the kind of athletic grace that suggested a body accustomed to action. His dark hair was too long, as though he'd stopped caring about appearances, and his clothes, while expensive, were slightly disheveled in a way that spoke of a man dressing by touch rather than sight. "Miss Sinclair," he said without turning, and his voice was cultured, cold, and edged with barely controlled rage. "You may leave immediately. I don't need another woman weeping over my tragedy or treating me like an invalid child." "I have no intention of weeping," Margot replied calmly, "and if you're acting like a child, I'll certainly treat you like one, Duke or not." The Duke turned then, and Margot felt her breath catch. His eyes were the color of winter ice, beautiful and completely unfocused. They swept past her face, seeking and failing to find her, and she saw frustration and fury war across his features. "You're impertinent," he said. "You're rude," Margot countered. though I suspect you're rude to everyone now, so I shouldn't take it personally. I'm rude because I'm blind, Miss Sinclair, because I'm trapped in darkness, dependent on others, unable to do the simplest tasks without assistance. I'm rude because fury is preferable to despair. Then be furious, Margot said. Just pay me while you're at it. For the first time, something like surprise crossed the Duke's face. You're mercenary? I'm practical. I need employment, Your Grace. You need someone who won't dissolve into tears every time you knock over a teacup or refuse assistance. We can help each other, provided you're willing to tolerate honesty. Honesty, the Duke repeated, as though tasting the word. Very well, Miss Sinclair. Here's honesty. I hate every moment of this existence. I was a man who rode, who fenced, who could read 6 languages and identify a painting at 20 paces. Now I can't cross a room without colliding with furniture. I can't read, can't see faces, can't do any of the things that made me who I was. So tell me honestly, what could you possibly offer that the previous 8 women couldn't? Margot considered him carefully. This proud, broken man who stood with military posture despite his helplessness. I can offer you indifference to your title and immunity to your anger. I can read to you without patronizing you. I can guide you without coddling you. And I won't pity you, Your Grace, because pity is useless. But I might understand you, which could prove more valuable. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, you're hired. But understand this, Miss Sinclair. I'm a terrible patient. I'm angry and bitter, and I will likely make your life miserable. I've had worse employment, Margot said dryly. When do I start? Now. There's a book on my desk, Plutarch's Lives. I was in the middle of the chapter on Alexander. Begin there. And so Margot's strange employment began. She read to the Duke for 4 hours that first day and learned that he had a mind like a steel trap. He remembered everything she read, could quote passages back to her, could engage in literary analysis that would have impressed her late father. When she stumbled over a word, he corrected her pronunciation without mockery. When she paused to rest her voice, he thanked her with stiff politeness. But when she tried to guide him to his chair for dinner, he jerked away from her touch as though burned. I can manage, he snapped. You're 3 feet from the chair, Margot observed. 2 steps forward and 1 to the left. The Duke moved forward 2 steps, turned left 2 sharply, and collided with a side table. A vase crashed to the floor. Margot said nothing. The Duke stood very still, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with humiliation. Aren't you going to help me? Do you want help? Margot asked. No? Yes. I don't know. The Duke's voice cracked on the admission. I don't know how to be this person. I don't know how to be helpless. You're not helpless, Margot said quietly. You're learning a new language. It takes time. I don't have time. I have obligations, estates to manage, a seat in the House of Lords, responsibilities that require— He stopped, swallowing hard. That required sight. Then we'll find ways for you to fulfill them without sight. How? The word was raw with desperation. I don't know yet, Margot admitted, but we'll figure it out. Now, the chair is 1 step forward and half a step right. Take your time. The Duke moved carefully and found the chair. He sank into it with a shuddering breath. Miss Sinclair? Yes, Your Grace. Thank you for not making this easier than it is. Margot understood then that her job wasn't to make things easy, it was to make them possible. The days fell into a pattern. Margot arrived each morning at 8 and stayed until evening. She read newspapers aloud so the Duke could stay informed about politics and business. She read novels and poetry and philosophy. She described the world outside his windows with careful precision, not the weather, which he could hear and feel, but the details he couldn't access. "Why do you do that?" the Duke asked one afternoon, when Margot had spent 5 minutes describing the way autumn light turned the trees in his garden to copper and gold. "Because you asked me not to pity you," Margot replied. "Pity would be pretending you don't miss seeing. Respect is acknowledging that you do and helping you experience it differently." "You're an unusual woman, Miss Sinclair." "I've been told that before. It's rarely meant as a compliment." "I mean it as one." The Duke hesitated, then asked, "Will you tell me what you look like? I've been trying to form a picture from your voice, but I can only imagine fragments." Margot felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She was not beautiful. She knew that with the certainty of a woman who'd been told so many times by so many cruel voices. She was too tall, too angular, her features too strong. Her hair was an indeterminate brown that never held a curl. Her eyes were her only decent feature, gray-green like river stones, but what good were eyes to a blind man? "I'm unremarkable," she said finally. "You're not missing anything." "Let me decide that," the Duke said, and there was something in his voice that Margot's pulse quickened. "Please, describe yourself to me." So Margot did, clinically, as though describing a stranger. Tall, thin, angular face, brown hair, gray-green eyes, a small scar on her left temple from a childhood fall. The Duke listened with absolute focus. "Your voice suggests someone younger than 26, someone who smiles rarely but genuinely, someone who's learned to make herself small despite being tall. Am I right?" Margot felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with sight. How did you—" "I'm learning a new language," the Duke said, echoing her words back to her. "And you're teaching me to hear what I can't see." Something shifted between them that day. The Duke began to ask questions, not just about books and news, but about Margot herself. Where had she grown up? What had her father taught her? Why did she love mathematics? What did she miss most about the life she'd left behind? Margot found herself answering, slowly at first, then with increasing honesty. She told him about her father's brilliance and his weakness, about poverty that turned people cruel, about dreams she'd abandoned because the world had no place for women who wanted to understand numbers and stars. "I would have liked to meet your father," the Duke said one evening as rain drummed against the windows. "He sounds like he gave you a remarkable education." "He gave me an unmarriable one," Margot corrected. "Men don't want wives who can calculate compound interest or read Latin." "Foolish men," the Duke said quietly, "though I suppose I'm in no position to judge. I can no longer see Latin at all." It was the first time he'd made a joke about his blindness, and Margot felt absurdly pleased. "Would you like to learn to read again?" she asked impulsively. "There's a system, raised dots on paper that can be read by touch. It's called Braille, after the Frenchman who invented it. I've been researching it." The Duke's head turned toward her voice with sudden intensity. "You've been researching ways for me to read?" "It seemed like it might be useful," Margot said, suddenly self-conscious. "If you're interested." "Show me." Margot had ordered sample materials from Paris, and she brought them the next day. She guided the Duke's fingers to the raised dots, taught him the alphabet, watched his frustration as he struggled to distinguish patterns. "It's impossible," he said after an hour of effort. "I can't feel the difference between half these letters." "You've been trying for an hour," Margot said. "Children take weeks to learn. Give yourself time." "I'm not accustomed to being slow at anything." "Then learn to be," Margot replied, and continued the lesson. But she also began to notice things that troubled her. The Duke's reluctance to leave his study, the way he tensed when visitors were announced, the careful control he maintained over every emotion except anger. "When did you last leave this house?" she asked one morning. "I don't leave," the Duke said flatly. "I have no interest in being led through London like a child on a string, subjected to pitying stares and whispered gossip. So you've made yourself a prisoner instead. I've made myself safe from humiliation." "Your Grace," Margot said carefully, "may I be brutally honest? Have you been anything else? You're letting your blindness destroy you more thoroughly than the accident did. You're a man who rode and fenced and traveled across Europe. Now you won't even walk in your own garden because you're afraid of being seen as weak." The Duke's face went rigid with fury. "You have no right." "I have every right. You hired me to help you, and I cannot help you if you refuse to live." Margot drew a breath. "Tomorrow morning, we're going for a walk in Hyde Park. You can rage at me all you like, but we're going. I'll dismiss you. You've threatened that 6 times this week. You haven't done it yet." The Duke stood abruptly, turning toward her voice with uncanny accuracy. "Why haven't I? Why do I tolerate your impertinence when I've dismissed everyone else?" "Because I'm the only person who doesn't treat you like you're broken," Margot said quietly. "And because you're lonely, Your Grace, as lonely as I am." The words hung between them, too honest, too raw. "Margot," the Duke said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. "Tomorrow, Hyde Park, but if one person laughs, then we'll leave immediately," Margot promised. "Trust me." "I'm trying," the Duke whispered, and Margot realized he wasn't just talking about the walk. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and Margot arrived to find the Duke dressed and waiting, his anxiety palpable. "Your arm," he said stiffly, and Margot extended it. His hand found her elbow with only a moment's fumbling, and they set off. Hyde Park was crowded with morning riders and walkers, and Margot felt the Duke tense as they entered the gate. But she kept up a steady stream of description: who was there, what they were wearing, where they were in relation to the path. And gradually, the Duke's grip on her arm relaxed. "There's a bench ahead," Margot said. "Would you like to sit?" "Yes, thank you." They sat in companionable silence, and Margot watched the Duke's face as he tilted his head to catch sounds: hoofbeats, conversation, birdsong, the rustle of leaves. "I'd forgotten," he said quietly, "the way the world sounds when you're not trapped inside walls. We'll come every day, if you like." "I'd like that very much." A woman passed by, Lady Catherine Winters, one of London's most notorious gossips, and Margot felt the Duke stiffen as he recognized the voice offering greetings. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you out and about. We've all been so concerned." "Lady Winters," the Duke replied with careful politeness, "Miss Sinclair has been kind enough to accompany me. The weather is too fine to waste indoors." "Indeed. Miss Sinclair, you must be a very special companion to accomplish what no one else could." There was speculation in Lady Winter's tone, implications that made Margot's cheeks burn. "Miss Sinclair is invaluable," the Duke said firmly, and there was steel beneath the courtesy. "I'm fortunate to have found her. Good day, Lady Winters." When the woman had gone, the Duke's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry," she implied. "I know what she implied," Margot said. "I don't care. Let them gossip." "I care. Your reputation." "My reputation was ruined long before I met you, Your Grace. I'm a penniless spinster working as a paid companion. Society has already judged me." "Then society is full of fools," the Duke said fiercely. "You're worth 100 Lady Winters." Margot felt something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. "We should head back." But as they walked home, the Duke's hand shifted from her elbow to her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was intimate, possessive, and entirely inappropriate. Margot knew she should pull away. She didn't. Back at the townhouse, the Duke didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, he stood in the entrance hall, his unfocused eyes seeking her face, and said quietly, "Margot, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, always. Do you think I'll ever be more than this, more than a blind man who needs to be led everywhere, who can't do anything without help?" "I think you already are more than that," Margot said. "You're learning Braille. You walked in Hyde Park despite your fear. You're fighting to reclaim your life instead of surrendering to darkness. That takes more courage than anything you did when you could see. You make it sound noble. It doesn't feel noble. It feels like drowning slowly." Margot took his other hand, so she held both, and felt him startle at the contact. "Then let me help you swim." "Why?" the Duke asked, and his voice was raw with vulnerability. "Why do you care what happens to me? I'm your employer, nothing more. You could do your job without—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Without making me hope." Hope for what? That I could be something other than an object of pity. That someone could see me as I was, not as I am. He drew a shuddering breath. That someone like you could care for someone like me. "Someone like me?" Margot repeated. "A ruined woman with no prospects and a talent for impertinence? Someone brilliant and brave and so determined not to need anyone that you've forgotten how to let yourself be needed in return." The Duke's hands tightened on hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Margot. I know it's impossible. I know you could never." "Stop," Margot whispered, because her heart was breaking and soaring simultaneously. "Don't tell me what I could never do. Then tell me what you could do. Tell me if there's any possibility." Margot made a decision that would change everything. She raised his hands to her face, pressing his palms against her cheeks. "I could love you back," she said quietly. "I think I already do." The Duke's breath caught, and his fingers began to move, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. He traced the shape of her face like a blind man learning to read, and Margot closed her eyes and let him see her the only way he could. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, mapping their height and angle. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her chin, the shape of her nose. He found her eyebrows and followed their arch, found her ears and traced their contours with a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "You said you were unremarkable," he murmured, his voice full of wonder. "You lied. I told you what I see in mirrors. Then mirrors are as blind as I am." His fingers found her lips, tracing their shape with devastating tenderness. "This mouth, it's strong and soft at once. Like you. These cheekbones, high and proud. This forehead, intelligent, questioning. And this," his fingers found the small scar at her temple. "This is where you fell as a child?" "When I was 7, I was climbing a tree to see the stars better." "Of course you were." The Duke's smile was the first shed scene that reached his eyes. "Margot Sinclair, brave and brilliant and beautiful." "I'm not. You are. I'm seeing you better than I ever saw anyone with sight. I'm seeing who you truly are. And you're magnificent." Margot felt tears slip down her cheeks, and the Duke's fingers caught them with surprise. "Why are you crying?" "Because no one has ever called me beautiful. Because you're seeing me in a way no one else ever has. Because I'm terrified and elated, and I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," the Duke admitted. "I don't know how to court a woman I can't see. I don't know how to prove I love you when I can't even pour tea without assistance. But I know that when you read to me, your voice makes darkness bearable. I know that when you take my hand, I feel less alone. I know that you've given me hope when I thought I had none left." "Christian," Margot whispered, using his given name for the first time. "What are we doing?" "Something reckless," Christian said. "Something impossible. Something that feels more right than anything I've ever done." He drew her closer, his hands still cradling her face. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." His first kiss was tentative, searching, learning. His second was sure. His third made Margot forget why this was impossible, forget everything except the sensation of being seen and known exactly as she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Christian rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "That's absurd." "Why? Because you're not a lady of rank? Because society will gossip? Because I'm blind and you're poor and we've known each other less than 3 months?" Christian's smile was reckless. "All true, all irrelevant. Marry me anyway. You need a proper duchess. Someone who can host balls and navigate society. Someone who—" "I need you," Christian interrupted. "Someone who doesn't pity me. Someone who makes me want to fight instead of surrender. Someone who loves me enough to drag me into Hyde Park against my will and teach me Braille and tell me brutal truths when I need to hear them. Your family will object. My family has been objecting to my existence since the accident. Let them object to my happiness, too." He caught her hands again. "Margot, I know I have little to offer you. A blind husband, a life of gossip and speculation, the constant burden of my limitations. But I can offer you freedom to be exactly who you are, to study mathematics and astronomy and anything else you desire. I can offer you my name, my protection, and every bit of devotion I possess. Say yes." Margot thought about her life before Christian, the loneliness, the constant struggle, the weight of being unwanted and unmarriageable. She thought about the last 3 months, reading to him, arguing with him, watching him fight his way back to life. She thought about his hands on her face, learning to see her through touch. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition. Anything. You stop apologizing for your blindness. You stop acting like you're less than you were. You're not broken, Christian. You're different, and that's enough." Christian pulled her close, and Margot felt him shaking with relief or joy or both. "When?" he asked. "When what? When will you marry me? Tomorrow? Next week? I don't want to wait." "We should wait at least." "No." Christian's voice was firm. "I've spent 6 months waiting in darkness. I'm done waiting. I want to start our life together now." So they did. The wedding took place 1 week later, in the Duke's private chapel, with only his elderly aunt as witness. Lady Victoria Ashford wept through the entire ceremony, not from grief, but from joy at seeing her nephew smile for the first time since the accident. "She's perfect for you," Lady Victoria told Christian afterward, embracing Margot warmly. "The others would have kept you locked away in cotton wool. She'll let you live." "She'll make me live," Christian corrected, his hand finding Margot's with practiced ease. "There's a difference." Margot moved into the townhouse as the Duchess of Ravenswood, and London society lost its collective mind. The gossip was vicious. The blind duke marrying his paid companion, the penniless nobody who'd somehow ensnared a peer, the scandal of a courtship so brief it must have been improper. "They're saying I seduced you while you were vulnerable," Margot reported one morning, reading the latest society column. "That I took advantage of your blindness to trap you into marriage." "Let them say what they like," Christian replied calmly. "We know the truth." "Which is?" "That you seduced me with your mind, trapped me with your honesty, and I went willingly." He reached out, and Margot took his hand automatically. "Come here." Margot let him draw her close, and Christian's hands found her face with the confidence of repetition. This had become their ritual. Each morning, he would read her face with his fingers, learning her moods and emotions through touch. "You're worried," he said, his thumbs tracing the small furrow between her brows. "About the gossip? About whether I'm enough, whether I can be what a duchess should be." "You're already more than I deserve." Christian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I see you better than anyone ever will. Remember that." But being a duchess required more than Christian's love. It required navigating society, hosting gatherings, fulfilling duties that Margot had no training for. Lady Victoria became her ally and teacher, showing her how to manage a household, how to hold receiving hours, how to move through the social world without losing herself. "They'll try to make you conform," Lady Victoria warned. "Don't let them." "My nephew fell in love with who you are, not who society wants you to be." Margot held on to that advice like a lifeline. The first test came 6 weeks after the wedding, when the Duke and Duchess were invited to a ball at the Hertfords' estate. Christian hadn't attended a social function since the accident, and Margot knew this was society's way of testing them both. "We don't have to go," she told Christian as they prepared. "Yes, we do." Christian was adjusting his cravat by touch, and Margot watched his fingers move with surprising accuracy. "If we hide, they win. If we go, we show them that blindness hasn't broken me, that you haven't diminished me, that we're stronger together than I ever was alone." "You're certain?" "No, but I trust you to guide me. That's enough." The ball was a gauntlet of whispers and stares. Margot felt every eye on them as they entered, heard every speculation muttered behind fans. But Christian held his head high, his hand secure on her arm, and together they moved through the crowd with careful dignity. "Your Grace!" Lady Hertford swept toward them, her smile too bright. "How brave of you to attend! We're honored by your presence." "Lady Hertford, thank you for the invitation." Christian's voice was polite but cool. "Miss Sinclair, my wife, has been eager to see your gardens. I understand they're spectacular." "They are, though perhaps not as accessible as—" Lady Hertford stopped, realizing what she'd implied. "Not as accessible as they should be," Margot finished smoothly. "But beauty is worth the effort, don't you think?" They survived the evening through teamwork. Margot described who was present, whispered warnings about obstacles, guided Christian through conversations. And Christian proved that blindness hadn't diminished his wit or intelligence. He discussed politics with the men, charmed the matrons, and danced with Margot in a modified waltz where she guided his steps through gentle pressure. "You're remarkable," Margot whispered as they moved together. "I have an excellent guide," Christian replied, and there was such love in his voice that several onlookers softened despite themselves. The turning point came when Lord Stirling, drunk and cruel, made a comment loud enough to be heard across the ballroom. The blind Duke and his fortune-hunting companion, quite the pair. Christian heard it. His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Margot did. "Lord Stirling," she said clearly, turning to face the man, though Christian couldn't. "Your eyesight seems perfectly functional. Yet you lack the vision to recognize value when you see it. My husband is worth 100 men like you, sight or no sight. And I am no fortune hunter. I'm the woman brave enough to love him exactly as he is. Can you say the same about anyone in your life?" The ballroom went silent. Then Lady Victoria began to clap. Slowly, others joined her, until the sound filled the room. Lord Stirling turned red and stalked away. Christian's hand found Margot's and squeezed gently. "My fierce Duchess," he murmured. "Thank you." Someone had to say it. No one else would have dared. After that night, the gossip began to shift. The blind Duke and his unusual Duchess became objects of fascination rather than mockery. Invitations poured in. Society, always eager for novelty, decided that their love story was romantic rather than scandalous. But Margot and Christian barely noticed. They were building a life together that had nothing to do with society's approval. Christian continued learning Braille, and Margot brought him books from Paris, entire novels translated into raised dots. She watched his frustration give way to triumph as he read his first complete book independently. "I'm reading again," he said, wonder in his voice. "Margot, I'm actually reading." "You never stopped reading," Margot corrected. "You just changed methods." They established new routines. Christian began managing his estates again, with Margot as his secretary. She read documents aloud, took dictation, helped him navigate the business of being a duke. His stewards were skeptical at first, but Christian's mind was as sharp as ever, and soon they realized that blindness hadn't diminished his judgment or intelligence. "He's better than he was before," one steward told Margot privately. "He listens more carefully now, considers all angles, makes wiser decisions." Margot told Christian, and he smiled. "Blindness taught me to pay attention, to value what I hear rather than jumping to conclusions based on what I see." "There's a metaphor in that," Margot observed. "There's a metaphor in everything. You've taught me that too." 6 months into their marriage, Christian surprised Margot with a gift, a telescope custom-made with extra-large dials and tactile markings. "I know you loved astronomy," he explained as Margot examined it with trembling hands. "I thought perhaps we could study the stars together. You could see them, describe them to me. We could map the constellations by touch and sound." "Christian, this must have cost." "Everything I have is yours, including the resources to pursue what you love." He found her hand, raised it to his lips. "Besides, I'm curious about these stars you're so passionate about. Teach me." So Margot taught him. They spent evenings on the roof of the townhouse, Margot watching the sky through the telescope while Christian listened to her descriptions with absolute focus. She taught them the names of stars and constellations, and he memorized them all, building a map of the night sky in his mind. "I can see why you love this," he said one clear night as Margot described the rings of Saturn. "The vastness of it, the order and chaos mixed together, the way everything is connected by forces we can't see but know are there." "Like us," Margot said quietly. "Like us," Christian agreed. Held together by something invisible but undeniable. A year after their wedding, Christian woke one morning and reached for Margot with the confidence of familiarity. His fingers found her face, and he traced the familiar landscape, the cheekbones he loved, the strong jaw, the mouth that smiled more now than when they'd met. "Good morning," he murmured. "Good morning." Margot caught his hand, kissed his palm. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For the accident." Margot pulled back in shock. "Christian?" "Let me finish." He sat up, his unfocused eyes seeking her general direction. "Before I lost my sight, I never would have noticed you. I would have seen your face and dismissed you as unremarkable. I would have valued beauty over intelligence, appearance over character. I would have married some vapid debutante and lived a perfectly conventional, perfectly meaningless life. You don't know that. I do. I was shallow, Margot, arrogant. I judged everything by surface appearances." Christian's hands found her face again. "Losing my sight taught me to see what matters, and it led me to you. So yes, I'm grateful, because this darkness gave me the only light I've ever needed." Margot felt tears slide down her cheeks, and Christian's thumbs caught them tenderly. "Now I see you better than before," he whispered. "Better than I ever saw anything. I see your kindness when you help me dress. I see your patience when I struggle with Braille. I see your brilliance in the way you explain stars. I see your love in 1,000 small touches. I see you, Margot, all of you, more clearly than sight ever allowed. I see you too, Margot said, her voice breaking, and you're beautiful. They made love then, in the gray morning light, Christian's hands reading her body like poetry, like scripture, like a map to a country only they inhabited. And Margot understood that seeing had never been about eyes. It was about attention, about devotion, about choosing to know someone so completely that the rest of the world fell away. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Christian said quietly, "Dr. Morrison wrote to me. There's a surgeon in Vienna who's had some success restoring sight in cases like mine. He thinks there might be a chance." Margot's heart stuttered. "Christian, would you want that? To see again?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants it desperately. To see you, to see the stars you describe, to see the world I remember. But another part of me fears it." "Fears what?" "That if I could see you with my eyes, I might lose the way I see you now. That if I regained my sight, I might lose this clarity." He turned toward her, his hand finding her face with unerring accuracy. "Promise me something. Anything. If I have the surgery, if I can see again, promise you won't let me forget what blindness taught me, that appearances don't matter, that the only way to truly see someone is to know them completely." "I promise," Margot whispered. "But Christian, whether you're blind or sighted, I'll love you exactly the same. You must know that." "I do. That's what makes me brave enough to try." The surgery was scheduled for spring. In the months leading up to it, Margot and Christian lived with deliberate intensity, memorizing the feel of each other's hands, the sound of each other's laughter, the rhythm of their shared life. "If it doesn't work," Christian said the night before the surgery, "I need you to know I have no regrets. This year with you has been worth everything. Sight or no sight, I'm complete because I have you." "It will work," Margot said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "And then you'll finally see what I look like and realize you married beneath you." Christian laughed and pulled her close. "Impossible. I've been seeing you with perfect clarity all along." The surgery took 6 hours. Margot waited with Lady Victoria, both of them silent with fear and hope. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged, his face was carefully neutral. "The surgery went well," he said, "but we won't know if it was successful until we remove the bandages. That will be in 2 weeks. The Duke will need complete rest and darkness until then." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Margot's life. Christian remained in bandages, patient but tense. Margot read to him, held his hand, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Finally, the day came to remove the bandages. Dr. Morrison worked carefully, unwinding layer after layer of gauze, while Margot stood nearby, her heart in her throat. Christian sat perfectly still, barely breathing. The last bandage came away. Christian blinked, once, twice. His eyes moved, tracking across the room with the confused precision of someone relearning sight. "Can you see?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Light," Christian said hoarsely. "Shapes, colors. It's all blurry, but yes, I can see." Margot felt tears stream down her face, relief and joy and terror mixed together. Christian's eyes found her general direction, then sharpened with focus. He stared at her for a long moment, and Margot saw his expression shift through surprise, wonder, and something that might have been disappointment. Her heart sank. "Christian?" she whispered. He stood slowly, crossed the distance between them, and took her face in his hands. The gesture so familiar now, but his eyes seeing for the first time. "You lied," he said. "I didn't. You told me you were unremarkable. Margot, you're stunning." Margot blinked, confused. "I'm not?" "You are." Christian's thumbs brushed her cheekbones, his newly restored eyes cataloging every detail. "But that's not what matters. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" "Everything I felt when I couldn't see you. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I see the woman who forced me to live when I wanted to hide. I see the woman who loved me when I was broken. I see my wife, my partner, my best friend. I see you exactly as I did in darkness, clearly, completely, truly." "You're certain?" Margot asked, and she hated the vulnerability in her voice. "You're not disappointed that I'm not—" Christian kissed her, stopping the words. When he pulled back, his eyes, clear and focused and beautiful, held hers with absolute certainty. "I told you I saw you better in darkness than I ever saw anything with sight. That's still true. Vision hasn't changed what I know about you. It's only confirmed it." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "Though I will admit, being able to see you smile is a bonus I didn't anticipate." Margot laughed through tears. "What else do you want to see?" "Everything. Stars through your telescope, the books in my library, the way light moves across our bedroom." He paused. "But mostly you. I want to watch you work, watch you think, watch you exist in the world. I spent a year learning to see you through touch and sound and feeling. Now I get to see you with my eyes, too. It's like meeting you all over again." Christian's sight returned slowly, in stages. First light and shadow, then color and shape, finally detail and distance. He relearned the world with Margot at his side, pointing out things he'd forgotten or never noticed. "The sky really is that blue," he marveled one afternoon. "Yes, I told you. You did. But seeing it is different. Better and worse simultaneously." "How worse?" "Because now I understand what I missed. The color of your eyes, they change in different light. Gray-green like river stones, exactly as you said, but also gold when you're happy, silver when you're sad. I couldn't see that before. I couldn't see how expressive your face is, how much you communicate without words." "Is that good or bad?" Margot asked. "Good, entirely good, because it means I get to keep discovering you." "Sight hasn't made you less mysterious, it's only given me another way to love you." They returned to society slowly, and the Tun was fascinated by the blind Duke who could see again. Invitations poured in, and everywhere they went, people stared, some with malicious curiosity, some with genuine wonder. "The Miracle Duke," someone called him at a dinner party, and Christian's jaw tightened. Later, at home, he said to Margot, "They think the surgery was the miracle. They're wrong." "What was the miracle?" Margot asked. "You. Finding someone who saw me when I couldn't see myself. Learning that vision has nothing to do with eyes." He took her hand, raised it to his lips. "The surgery gave me back my sight. You gave me back my life. There's no comparison." A year after the surgery, on their second anniversary, Christian led Margot to the roof where they'd spent so many evenings studying stars. "I have a gift for you," he said. "You've given me everything already." "Not this." He handed her a leather-bound book, and when Margot opened it, she gasped. It was an atlas of the night sky, hand-drawn in exquisite detail. But it wasn't just visual. Each constellation had notes in Braille beside the images, tactile markers that could be felt as easily as seen. "You made this," Margot whispered. "I did. It took months. I wanted to create something that honored both ways of seeing, the way I see now and the way I learned to see when I was blind. Christian moved behind her, his arms circling her waist. You taught me that there are many ways to understand the world. This is my way of showing I remember. Margot turned in his arms, the atlas pressed between them. I love you. I love you more. Christian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You know what the best part of regaining my sight is? What? I get to watch you smile. I get to see the way your face lights up when you're excited about stars. I get to see you walk into a room and know you're mine. He paused, his expression turning serious. But if I lost my sight again tomorrow, I wouldn't be afraid. Because I know now that seeing you has nothing to do with eyes. I could be blind for the rest of my life and still see you more clearly than anyone else ever will. You're certain? Margot asked, and it was the same question she'd asked the day the bandages came off. Christian's answer was the same, completely. Now I see you better than before. I always will. They stood together on the roof, looking up at stars that blazed overhead, some visible, some invisible, all connected by forces that couldn't be seen, but were undeniably real. Just like the love between a blind duke who learned to see and the woman who taught him how. 5 years later, Margot stood in the library of Ravenswood Manor, watching Christian teach their 4-year-old daughter to read Braille. Little Victoria, named for Christian's aunt, was sighted, but Christian insisted she learned both ways to read. Because someday she might meet someone who can't see, he explained to Margot. And she'll need to understand that there are many ways to read, many ways to see, many ways to love. Margot watched her husband's hands guide their daughter's small fingers across the raised dots, and she felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "Mama," Victoria called, "Papa says you can read this too. Can you?" "I can," Margot said, crossing to kneel beside them. "Your papa taught me, a long time ago." "Tell me the story," Victoria demanded, "about when Papa couldn't see and you taught him everything." "It's not quite like that," Christian said, his eyes meeting Margot's with a warmth that still made her breath catch. "She taught her some things. I taught her others. We learned together." "What did you teach Mama?" Victoria asked. Christian smiled. "I taught her that she was beautiful, that intelligence matters more than appearance." That love isn't about seeing with eyes. It's about seeing with everything else. "That's confusing," Victoria announced. "You'll understand when you're older," Margot promised. That night, after Victoria was asleep, Margot and Christian stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the night sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Margot asked. "The accident, the blindness, all of it?" Christian turned to face her, and even after years of marriage, the intensity of his gaze still made her pulse quicken. "Never. Because it led me to you. Because it taught me what matters. Because—" He cupped her face in his hands, the gesture as familiar as breathing. "Because now I see you better than before. I see you with my eyes, yes, but more importantly, I see you with my heart. And that kind of seeing never ends." Margot leaned into his touch. This man who'd learned to see her in darkness and never stopped seeing her clearly. "I see you too," she whispered. "All of you. Always." And in the quiet of their bedroom, with stars blazing overhead and their daughter sleeping down the hall, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood held each other and understood that the truest sight had nothing to do with eyes. It had everything to do with love. "I have a gift for you," he said. "You've given me everything already." "Not this." He handed her a leather-bound book, and when Margot opened it, she gasped. It was an atlas of the night sky, hand-drawn in exquisite detail. But it wasn't just visual. Each constellation had notes in Braille beside the images, tactile markers that could be felt as easily seen. "You made this," Margot whispered. "I did. It took months. I wanted to create something that honored both ways of seeing, the way I see now and the way I learned to see when I was blind." Christian moved behind her, his arms circling her waist. "You taught me that there are many ways to understand the world. This is my way of showing I remember." Margot turned in his arms, the atlas pressed between them. "I love you. I love you more." Christian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You know what the best part of regaining my sight is?" "What?" "I get to watch you smile. I get to see the way your face lights up when you're excited about stars. I get to see you walk into a room and know you're mine." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But if I lost my sight again tomorrow, I wouldn't be afraid, because I know now that seeing you has nothing to do with eyes. I could be blind for the rest of my life and still see you more clearly than anyone else ever will." "You're certain?" Margot asked, and it was the same question she'd asked the day the bandages came off. Christian's answer was the same, completely. "Now I see you better than before. I always will." They stood together on the roof, looking up at stars that blazed overhead, some visible, some invisible, all connected by forces that couldn't be seen, but were undeniably real. Just like the love between a blind duke who learned to see and the woman who taught him how. 5 years later, Margot stood in the library of Ravenswood Manor, watching Christian teach their 4-year-old daughter to read Braille. Little Victoria, named for Christian's aunt, was sighted, but Christian insisted she learn both ways to read, because someday she might meet someone who can't see, he explained to Margot, and she'll need to understand that there are many ways to read, many ways to see, many ways to love. Margot watched her husband's hands guide their daughter's small fingers across the raised dots, and she felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "Mama," Victoria called, "Papa says you can read this too. Can you?" "I can," Margot said, crossing to kneel beside them. "Your papa taught me a long time ago." "Tell me the story," Victoria demanded, "about when Papa couldn't see and you taught him everything." "It's not quite like that," Christian said, his eyes meeting Margot's with a warmth that still made her breath catch. "She taught me some things. I taught her others. We learned together." "What did you teach Mama?" Victoria asked. Christian smiled. "I taught her that she was beautiful, that intelligence matters more than appearance, that love isn't about seeing with eyes, it's about seeing with everything else." "That's confusing," Victoria announced. "You'll understand when you're older," Margot promised. That night, after Victoria was asleep, Margot and Christian stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the night sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Margot asked. "The accident, the blindness, all of it?" Christian turned to face her, and even after years of marriage, the intensity of his gaze still made her pulse quicken. "Never. Because it led me to you. Because it taught me what matters. Because," he cupped her face in his hands, the gesture as familiar as breathing, "because now I see you better than before. I see you with my eyes, yes, but more importantly, I see you with my heart. And that kind of seeing never ends." Margot leaned into his touch, this man who'd learned to see her in darkness and never stopped seeing her clearly. "I see you too," she whispered, "all of you, always." And in the quiet of their bedroom, with stars blazing overhead and their daughter sleeping down the hall, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood held each other and understood that the truest sight had nothing to do with eyes. It had everything to do with love.